We were driving across old Route 66 when we had the epiphany. 8 or 9 days earlier, we had arrived on BNSF's Needles subdivision with mixed emotions. After all, this was the eastern Mojave Desert, hot, flat, colorless. Given the topography and the relative lack of industry on the 168-mile line, we expected little more than a flood of trains racing between Needles and Barstow, California. But something happened. Suddenly, we felt like Paul on the road to Damascus, blinded by the revelation that we'd been wrong. And in that moment, we realized we'd fallen in love with this strange, desolate place. But exactly how that had come to pass, well, that was a mystery not easily answered. A map of BNSF's Needles sub offers little clue to the feelings it invoked. Although the line is located entirely in Southern California, it's worlds away from the beaches and skyscrapers usually associated with the region. Station names don't mean much by themselves either. At Barstow, BNSF sorts eastbound traffic from northern, central, and southern California. Trains then head east to Daggett, where westbound Union Pacific trains from Las Vegas and Ogden, Utah, use BNSF trackage rights over Cajon Pass to the Los Angeles area. From there, the tracks connect a series of dots in the desert: Newberry, Ludlow, Cadiz, and Goffs. The crew change at Needles marks the eastern end of the subdivision. The Needles sub follows a route determined, for the most part, by the Mojave's terrain. But the same desert demands that our story follow a different, non-linear path. Following the Needles sub from one end to the other won't help us find the key to the mystery of our epiphany. The answer lies elsewhere, in places not necessarily listed in the BNSF timetable. Burlington Northern Santa Fe Corporation may not seem like a catalyst for conversion. Headquartered in Fort Worth, Texas, it operates one of the largest railroad networks in North America. Some 34,000 route miles cover 28 states and 2 Canadian provinces. BNSF's map stretches from major Pacific Northwest and California ports to the Midwest, Southeast, and Southwest, and from the Gulf of Mexico to Canada. It's trackside where BNSF comes alive. The Needles sub was part of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, one of 2 railroads merged in 1995 to form BNSF. Power consists on the Needles sub often contain locomotives from Santa Fe and BNSF's other component, the Burlington Northern Railroad. Motive power plays a large part in the Needles sub's allure. High speeds and heavy tonnage demand the newest, most powerful locomotives from locomotive builders General Electric and General Motors' Electromotive Division, known as EMD. The workhorse diesels are GE-9-44CWs, such as BNSF 733. Known as a C-44, the 733 produces 4,400 horsepower from a 16-cylinder, 4-stroke diesel engine. Large radiators at the rear of the unit dispense the heat generated by the diesel engine. The C-44's horsepower is converted to electrical energy, which is fed to 3 DC traction motors in the -9's pair of bolsterless trucks. The other C-44s you'll see on the Needles sub are units painted in BNSF's Heritage paint scheme. The colors echo the green and orange of predecessor Great Northern, merged into Burlington Northern in 1970. EMD's answer to the C-44 is the SD-75M. Like the big GEs, BNSF 8285 sports a large radiator designed to handle the heat from the SD75M's 4,300 horsepower diesel engine. The SD75M's DC traction motors ride in self-steering trucks, a design unique to EMD. The trucks literally steer through curves, reducing wheel flange and rail wear and improving the locomotive's pulling power. The newest high-horsepower units share assignments with some of the oldest diesels acquired from BNSF's predecessors Santa Fe and BN. An intriguing example of the latter is this EMD SDP-40. Custom built for Great Northern, the 6399 was identical in most ways to the 3,000 horsepower SD-40. The exception was the P in its model name, which stands for the steam generator installed in the unit to heat GN's passenger trains. After Amtrak took over most of the nation's passenger service in 1971, BN yanked the steam generator from the 6399 and placed the unit in freight service. But the extended hood and squared-off car body, characteristic of the SDP-40, remain intact, a clue to its glamorous past. Regardless of what locomotives are in charge, you'll see a variety of trains on the Needles sub. At the forefront are the Z and Q trains, which represent BNSF's high-priority intermodal traffic. They usually rate the best locomotives hauling a mix of containers and trailers on flat cars, known as COFC and TOFC respectively. Containers also move in double-stack trains. One of the most impressive sights you'll see on the Needles sub is a BNSF double-stack train moving like an ocean liner across the desert sea. For all their grandeur, though, stackers are low-priority trains. Automobiles move in V-trains made up of long strings of tri-level and bi-level auto-rack cars. The panels on the sides of the auto-racks protect the vehicle's inside from vandalism. Unit trains usually mean unit grain trains of corn, wheat, and other agricultural products. The Needles sub also sees unit steel trains moving between California and Birmingham, Alabama. Trailing the pack are the manifest trains. Although P trains rate higher than their M train counterparts, both usually contain boxcars, tank cars, and other freight cars. Both manifest and stack trains frequently rate helper locomotives to help them up the two grades that plague the Needles sub. You'll also see helpers moving back to Needles after helping a train, a move called light helpers. Amtrak's Southwest Chief operates over the Needles sub at night, but we were lucky enough to catch Amtrak X991, a test train consisting of 2 Genesis diesels and 30 express boxcars. Part of our fascination with the Needles sub hinges on the high number of trains BNSF stuffs each day between Needles and Barstow. Factor in Union Pacific's 10 to 20 trains between Barstow and Daggett, and you have one of the busiest stretches of double-track railroad in America. BNSF handles the load with 2 signal systems. A dispatcher at the railroad's Network Operations Center in Fort Worth, Texas, handles 14 miles between Needles and Ibis with centralized traffic control, called CTC. CTC allows the dispatcher to control the throwing of switches and the clearing of signals for train operation by signal indication from a machine in his or her office. Traffic on the 8 miles between Barstow and Daggett also move under CTC. Dusk at Ibis reveals a westbound stack train led by Santa Fe SD40-2 5057. The engineer faces the signals that govern the end of CTC territory. Minutes later, a westbound Z train blows by on the south track. The idea is for the Z train to get ahead of the slower stack train, which allows it to keep its schedule into Barstow. After the faster train passes, the stack train's conductor climbs back in the cab. When the Z train clears the block, the slower stack train will follow it up Goff's Hill. The Needles sub-dispatchers can't see the parade of trains they orchestrate from inside the Network Operations Center. Take Daggett, for instance. You might not know it from this trailer park near the UP BNSF interlocking, but Daggett was once a major transshipment point for the borax trade mined in nearby Calico. When local developers heard that Santa Fe planned to build a major yard here, they drove the price of real estate sky high. Santa Fe outflanked them and built the yard at nearby Waterman Junction instead. Later, the railroad named the new site after the middle name of its president, William Barstow Strong. We can't help but wonder what Strong would think if he could see the flood of BNSF trains the dispatchers stuffed through Daggett between 9 a.m. and noon on March 30th, 1998. Between Ibis and Daggett, traffic moves under automatic block signal protection called ABS. Most trains travel in the normal direction of traffic, whereby eastbounds travel on the south track and westbounds on the north track. ABS doesn't prevent the dispatcher from allowing fast trains to sack slow ones. An eastbound manifest train led by Santa Fe 855 stops at the summit of Ash Hill. After the conductor lines the switch, the train pulls into the siding. In the middle of the move, a westbound manifest train blasts by on the south track, proof of the ability of double-track ABS to keep the railroad fluid. At the east end of the siding, the eastbound manifest train stops. A moment later, the reason for the sack appears: BNSF 4737 on the point of a fast-moving eastbound stack train. Switches in ABS territory aren't controlled by the Fort Worth dispatcher on the Needles sub. This switch at the east end of Goff's needs to be thrown by hand. The switch at the west end of Goff's offers an alternative. The mechanical switchman is a spring switch that allows a westbound train to roll out of the west end of the siding without having to stop, line the switch, then stop to line it back again. A spring mechanism automatically returns the points to a normal position after they've been displaced by the passage of cars in a trailing point movement. The Route 66 bridge over the tracks offered a grandstand seat view of ABS in action at Essex, 48 miles west of Needles. Every program we've produced for Trains on Location included locomotives, trains, and operations. But what none of these shows have is the backdrop of the eastern Mojave Desert. The causal factor that describes most deserts is water, or specifically, the lack of it. Like any desert, the Mojave is a place where water is severely limiting to life most of the time. Another characteristic is a large temperature range between day and night. The Mojave's low humidity and relative absence of clouds allows the sun to heat the ground all day long, but up to 90% of this heat is lost to the night sky, so daily temperature fluctuations of 50 degrees Fahrenheit are common. But these are facts, the laws of nature. They're as indisputable as the physical laws that allow this diesel engine to turn fossil fuel oil into electricity. What facts and laws can't convey is something else, something that seeps into your unconscious mind and permeates your thoughts, the mystique of the desert.
The weird solitude, the great silence, the grim desolation are the very things with which every desert wanderer eventually falls in love. You think that very strange, perhaps? Well, the beauty of the ugly was sometime a paradox, but today people admit its truth, and the grandeur of the desolate is just as paradoxical, yet the desert gives it proof. John C. Van Dyke, The Desert, 1901.
To those who do listen, the desert speaks of things with an emphasis quite different from that of the shore, the mountains, the valleys, or the plains. Whereas they invite action and suggest limitless opportunity, exhaustless resources, the implications and the mood of the desert are something different. For one thing, the desert is conservative, not radical. It is more likely to provoke awe than to invite conquest. In intimate details, as when its floor is covered after a spring rain with the delicate little ephemeral plants, it is pretty. But such embodiments of prettiness seem to be only tolerated with affectionate contempt by the region as a whole. As a whole, the desert is, in the original sense of the word, awful. Joseph Wood Crutch, The Voice of the Desert, 1954.
If the Needles Sub is a steel river in the desert, then the yards at Barstow and Needles represent an oasis at each end of the subdivision. The Barstow classification yard is the bright jewel in the subdivision's crown. This is the sort of place that the railroad likes to show off to customers and civic leaders, an example of how efficiently it sorts and handles trains with a minimum of noise and pollution. To that extent, Barstow belongs in the bright spotlight of the desert sun. Barstow is a hump yard, by which the classification of cars is accomplished by pushing them over the summit of a hill dubbed the hump. The cars then roll by gravity into specific tracks determined by the hump yardmaster. To shove the long cuts of cars over the hump, BNSF uses locomotives mated to yard slugs. BN 6292 is a weighted rail vehicle with traction motors but no power source of its own. The parent unit, BN 6267, supplies all the power, which provides extra traction at a lower cost than two powered units. Santa Fe 1557 represents the SD39 powered slug set that's worked Barstow for years. Barstow's massive diesel facility performs routine and heavy maintenance on the road slug as well as assigned BNSF road units. The shop does everything from basic sanding and fueling to more extensive work such as mechanical and electrical overhauls and locomotive wheel replacement. The yard at Needles, on the other hand, isn't likely to appear on BNSF's internet website anytime soon. There's no hump here, just a handful of tracks. And what passes for a diesel shop is basically a parking lot. For some reason, we always ended up in Needles' yard after dark. Maybe it was an unconscious thing. Like a flashbulb in the face of an aging movie star, the sun's glare reveals the lines and fading color of the area's decline. But at night, the yard seems every bit as important as Barstow. And maybe it is. Night is especially kind to the Depot and Harvey House restaurant at the east end of the yard. After years of disuse, the grand building is fenced off to keep troublemakers and vagrants from tearing the place up. Better to visit at night when the shadows hide the building's crumbling facade. Under the impassive face of the night sky, you can dream of better times, nights when people crowded the brick platforms and sleeping car passengers glanced through their roomette window at the station name carved into the building. If the station is haunted, we like to think the ghosts are cheered by the rumble and roar of passing BNSF freights. The station at milepost 648.1 goes by the name Cadiz. Located 70 miles west of Needles, it's named after its counterpart city in Spain. But if you ask us, its name should reflect what it means today, contradictions. Consider this water tank next to the tracks. It doesn't look anything like the traditional water tank from the steam locomotive era. Nonetheless, they once served the Santa Fe steam engines that stopped here to take on water. The arrival of the diesel did away with most of the water tanks on the Santa Fe, including many on the Needles sub. But these few hung on to serve the half a dozen families that lived in section houses along the right-of-way until the mid-1980s. The water tanks saved the railroad the trouble of bringing drinking water to the town in tank cars, a common practice on other parts of the Needles sub. The salt cedars that line the tracks at the east end of town are another contradiction. They're not what you expect to find in an environment that seems hostile to anything but date palms. We later learned that Santa Fe planted the trees as a wind block. And where did the water that irrigated them come from? Well, the water tanks, of course. What survives is Cadiz's function as the west end of a shortcut that allows eastbound trains to save a day between Barstow and Phoenix. For many years, Santa Fe operated a pair of trains that ferried cars between Cadiz and Matthey, the junction with its line to Phoenix. But even that role changed after Santa Fe in 1991 sold the route to a startup short line, the Arizona and California Railroad. Today's A&C operates the 191 miles between Cadiz and Matthey, another 57 miles of trackage rights into Phoenix, and 50 miles of branch lines in California. The railroad's headquarters are at Parker, Arizona, 85 miles from Cadiz. Although the railroad continues to grow its local traffic, the bulk of its business remains the overhead traffic moving between Cadiz and Matthey, the junction with the BNSF's Phoenix subdivision. As luck would have it, the A&C wasn't operating a daylight train between Cadiz and Parker during our visit, the result of BNSF track work. Instead, we hooked up with the daily train out of Parker and followed it east. The freight cars in our eastbound train offer a clue to A&C's traffic base. This lone bulkhead flat contains lumber for construction. The tank cars contain flammable gas from Southern California. BNSF will deliver the gas to salt caverns near Phoenix for underground storage. The hopper cars also contain building materials, in this case, cement. Bringing up the rear of the train is intermodal traffic bound for Phoenix. Good track and reliable motive power kept our train moving at the Parker subdivision's maximum authorized speed of 49 miles per hour. The 8 units of our train represent a cross-section of A&C's all-EMD locomotive fleet, which consists entirely of 4 motor units. Leading the eastbound train is 3803, a 2,000 horsepower GP38. The first 2 numbers reflect the locomotive model. Thus, 3002 is a GP30 rated at 2,250 horsepower. Other units include GP35s at 2,500 horsepower, the most powerful units in the fleet. Viewers familiar with our Rails Around the Bay Area program may recognize A&C's colors and logo, which are shared with California Northern, A&C's sister railroad in the North Bay Area near San Francisco. The handoff between the A&C and BNSF usually takes place at Castle Hot Springs, site of a 7,100-foot siding. The crew on the westbound BNSF train from Phoenix has already cut off from their train. The power sits on the main line while the A&C cuts off from the eastbound train. Moments later, the A&C backs into the siding to couple onto the westbound train. The BNSF power in the background heads down the main to couple onto the train A&C just delivered. Minutes later, the BNSF train leaves town and passes the westbound A&C train, which continues to hold the siding. When the BNSF train clears the switch, the A&C makes its move. The switch that controls the siding is a unique design called an easy throw. It uses a circular crank to move the switch instead of the lever found on conventional switches. After the tail end of the A&C train passes, the conductor lines the switch back for the main line. An A&C official will bring the conductor back to the head end of the train before it leaves town for its return to Parker. At Matthey, the A&C leaves BNSF trackage rights and rejoins its own main line for the 106 miles to Parker. After the train is recrewed, it will head west on the Cadiz sub to its connection with the BNSF at Cadiz. As for the BNSF Phoenix subdivision, it's back to business as usual. Amboy sits at milepost 661.5, 83 miles west of Needles. One of our guidebooks noted that the average rainfall here amounts to less than 1 inch per year. Our guess is that most of that fell during our first visit to the town. Amboy claims another distinction. BNSF delivers its drinking water in tank cars loaded at the railroad's well in Newberry Springs. Once upon a time, most of the desert communities along the railroad received their drinking water this way. Only Amboy remains, a throwback to the time when the Santa Fe Railroad was the desert's lifeline. As interesting as the operation are the cars themselves. They're original Santa Fe tank cars, some of them converted from hauling diesel fuel oil. Part of BNSF's vision statement holds that the communities we serve benefit from our sensitivity to their interests. At Amboy, the railroad's vision statement literally holds water. A 1946 guidebook to Highway 66 mentions the Amboy Crater, an extinct volcano just west of town that rises 250 feet from the desert floor. The crater is surrounded for a square mile by the burnt rock of lava flows, some of which have occurred in the last few thousand years. Although most of the Mojave cinder cones have been mined for their cinders, the Amboy Crater remains relatively untouched. In fact, the lava flow that nudges the south edge of the old Route 66 highway offers a fine view of the railroad action west of Amboy. Any thoughts of the Mojave being perfectly flat are quickly dispelled by the two stiff grades that westbounds face on their way to Barstow. The first grade crests at Goffs, 31 miles west of Needles. This is the start of 28 miles of 1.4% grade that frequently requires helpers on heavy westbound trains. West of Ibis, the double tracks split. The north track takes a route far to the north, seeking the easier uphill grade for westbound trains. The tracks rejoin at Arrowhead Junction near the at-grade crossing of US 95. Here, the normally double-track Needles sub looks like a different railroad. It's a good place to park and watch the action unfold. Goffs represents the crest of the hill. For the next 50 miles or so, westbound trains race down grade. The main line divides again near Siberia. This is the east end of the other westbound grade on the Needles sub, Ash Hill. The view from parallel Route 66 shows the difference in track elevation. BN 8018 West is on the north track with a manifest freight. Eastbound on the lower south track is BNSF 715. It's in charge of a hot intermodal Z train. The view looks remarkably different from the north side of the divide. The north track in the foreground frames a BN SD 40-2 leading an eastbound manifest freight on the south track. The fill that supports the north track is readily apparent from the north side of the split. From here, BNSF 727 West will swing away through a series of curves to seek a gentler grade. The best place to take in the action on the north track west of the divide is Klondike. Trains author Dave Bussey recommends driving the roads to this point in nothing less than a four-wheel drive vehicle, but the effort's worth it. The drama doesn't diminish after the tracks come back together. From this point, the line continues to climb until the top of the grade at Ash Hill proper. The sight of a westbound train poking its way up from below the crest of the grade should dispel any lingering doubts about the Needles sub being a mountain railroad. But if you need further convincing, we suggest you follow our lead and spend some time on Ash Hill. A few miles west of Siberia, the South Track crosses a dry wash on a steel bridge that bears the sun-beaten logo of the Santa Fe Railroad. It's no coincidence that the logo faces what was the old Route 66. Bridges like this once provided free advertising and promoted the railroad's public image. And in the highway's heyday, the message reached untold millions of potential customers.
66, the long concrete path across the country, waving gently up and down on the map, from the Mississippi to Bakersfield, over the Redlands and the Graylands, twisting up into the mountains, crossing the divide, and down into the bright and terrible desert. 66 is a path of a people in flight, refugees from dust and shrinking land. They come into 66 from the tributary side roads, from the wagon tracks and the rutted country roads. 66 is the mother road, the road of flight. John Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath, 1939.
Over time, Route 66 has become more than just a highway. It's a national symbol, a pathway to better times, always elusive yet no less desired. In this part of California, the completion of Interstate 40 in the early 1970s delivered a roundhouse punch to the old road, almost killing it. But the old highway remains, a dark slash in the desert that shadows the BNSF tracks between Needles and Barstow. As you'd expect, Route 66 is home to a special breed of person. These are folks who create sculptures of steam engines and display them in their front yards. They buy retired Missouri Pacific boxcars, splice them with an awning and a chain-link fence, and call it home. The unofficial symbol of the Mojave may be the automobile, whether abandoned or lovingly preserved. The railroad opened up the desert in the 1880s, but the rubber-tired, carries its own water, get there when you want car brought more humans through the Mojave than the early railroads. The lure of the early automobile was that it was under the driver's personal control. The mere fact that one could slow down, even stop at will, something the railroad passenger couldn't do, changed everything. Mind you, most desert travelers only stop for fuel and water, perhaps to use a clean restroom. Service stations like this one near Newberry Springs existed mainly for that reason. But when Interstate 40 opened, the motorists abandoned the old highway and the gas stations that once served them. The Needles Sub isn't the only evidence of the railroad along Route 66. Wiley's wrecking near Daggett is more than a graveyard for retired Santa Fe cabooses. Owner Floyd J. Wiley resells them to private owners, a thriving business that brought in more than 80 sales in recent years. Not that Floyd is fussy about what he has to sell. Take a look around and see for yourself. "1924 saw the release of the silent film The Thief of Baghdad. Directed by Raoul Walsh, the film starred Douglas Fairbanks as the thief. Well, that film has nothing to do with Baghdad, California. For many years, this Baghdad's claim to fame was that it went the longest time without rainfall in recorded history in North America, 36 months, between 1917 and 1920 to be exact. It's a long way from the glory days of the Orange Blossom Gold Mine, 9 miles to the north. What we found was little more than a wide spot in the right-of-way, a place where the BNSF work train could shuffle its cars and locomotives before heading west to Ash Hill. An unused wooden loading dock next to the track is the only structure that marks Baghdad proper. But legendary Baghdad, well, that's another story. Actually, it's more of a movie. The real-life Baghdad Cafe in Newberry Springs served as the location for Percy Adlon's 1988 film Baghdad Cafe. It's the story of a woman who storms off to a coffee shop after a fight with her husband. She winds up staying there and, in the process, brings a spark of life to the place. If you ask us, it sounds a lot like the owner of the real Baghdad Cafe, owner Andre Pruitt.
Had the Baghdad Cafe for 2.5 years, and I bought it. We came up and bought a section of land, 640 acres. We were going to raise ostriches. Then we came down and stopped to get a hamburger, and the lady said, oh, she was selling the place. And my husband looked at me and I said, don't even think about it. So here I am. Well, they say there's a magic about the place, and if you see the movie, you'll see they did magic in the film. We have people from all over the world. South Africa, Czechoslovakia yesterday. We've had people from Poland, from Russia, from all over the world. I lived in LA for 20 years and I meet more people here, and they're so happy. They come in and say, oh, I'm so glad to be in the Baghdad Cafe. I dream about being in the Baghdad Cafe. My children dream about being in the Baghdad Cafe. It's just amazing. And I looked at them to start with and said, you did? They did.
In the desert, there is all, and yet nothing. God is there, and man is not. Balzac, Passion in the Desert, 1896.
Somewhere near the town of Ludlow lies the right-of-way of the old Tonopah and Tidewater Railroad. At its peak in 1939, the T&T operated 143 miles of track, mainly between Ludlow and the Pacific Coast Borax Company's mine near Death Valley, California. But the decline of the mines in the late 1920s triggered the eventual demise of the railroad, which gave up the ghost in 1940. We never did find the T&T right-of-way, but in the hills west of Ludlow we found some of the best places to watch trains on the entire Needles sub. The T&T is gone, but Ludlow continues to host BNSF trains like this eastbound stack train. The railroad, Interstate 40, and old Route 66 all converge at Ludlow. Traffic off the freeway supports a Chevron station and a faded restaurant, the Ludlow Coffee Shop. But a mile or so east of the exit we found several abandoned buildings. They were the shells of establishments that once served travelers on the old highway. It's nothing like the glowing report that appeared in the Barstow printers back in April 1922.
The town of Ludlow is surely an oasis on the desert. It is located 55 miles east of Barstow, and this time of the year, when driving to Ludlow, the traveler is greeted by a garden of wild flowers, their perfumes scenting the country for miles. The first glimpse you get of the town as you go over the hill is that all of the buildings are painted. And as the traveler enters, he observes how clean the yards and streets are kept. The trees and shrubbery attract attention and show that the residents take an interest in making the place attractive. And then, when the traveler learns that the water for irrigation and also for drinking purposes is hauled 30 miles, he certainly admires the pluck of the Ludlow residents.
Earlier, we'd stumbled across the ghost town of Danby. On the south side of the BNSF tracks, we found a jumble of machinery that looked like it might have processed ore mined in the nearby mountains. The plant, if that's what it was, lay naked in the sun, open to our inspection, but we didn't find any clues to its purpose or who'd worked there. We knew that in the 1940s, Danby hosted a gas station, a store, and a garage for light automobile repairs, but there was no evidence of that here, Instead, we found the shells of several crumbling houses scattered around the plant like the moons that orbit a lifeless planet. Production assistant Steve Hart thought this twisted fencing might have been part of a chicken coop or a livestock pen, but the ramshackle structure nearby wasn't talking. In truth, the secrets of desert ghost towns aren't easily revealed. You wouldn't know it from the blank stare of the Ludlow Mercantile Building, but it once belonged to a woman named Mother Preston. She owned at least 8 other buildings along Main Street located north of the railroad. Much of the rest of the town belonged to the Murphy brothers, who at one point owned a restaurant, store, warehouse, and garage. The loss of the Tonopah and Tidewater and another short line, the Ludlow and Southern, spelled decline for Ludlow in the 1930s. The town that at one time had consisted of 2 commercial blocks and a population of 500 people began to wither. Like Danby, a handful of ancient wood structures circle the dark star of the Ludlow Mercantile Company. One of the misconceptions about the desert is that it's timeless, that nothing changes here. A visit to the Ludlow Cemetery gently puts that idea to rest. The sand under our feet was once solid rock, perhaps part of a high mountain range, but violent thunder showers and powerful winds work to break the rocks down. Nature means change. Change means life. And inevitably, life means death. The simple headstones we found here bore different words, different names, but the lesson was the same. One day we decided to follow the route of the abandoned Ludlow and Southern Railroad in search of Stedman, reportedly another ghost town. We thought we'd find remnants of the town that grew up around the site of the Baghdad Chase mine in the early 1900s. At Stedman's sister burg of Ragtown, we found the site of a worked-out mine. The top of a wood piling showed where the Ludlow and Southern had built a siding to serve the mine site. The names and warnings we found at the site told us that scientists were exploring the old shafts. Ragtown heightened our curiosity about Stedman, once the site of an engine house, several mine structures, and over 24 wood houses. What we found instead left us more perplexed than before. The closest thing to a structure was what appeared to be a wooden head frame set into the side of a mountain. Nearby sat the twisted remains of a truck trailer that had been torched for some unknown reason. A broken wooden chair faced the remains of an old campsite. The climax of our search was the discovery of a Santa Fe tank car cradled in the sand, probably used for fuel storage. Like everything else we found, the bullet holes were unexplained. That's the Mojave for you. It's an endless contradiction, a riddle devised to confuse preconceptions. It's a ghost town bustling with interstate travelers. A helper district in what appears to be a flat land. A charming restaurant on a road that should have followed the steam locomotive in the Edsel into history. How did we come to fall in love with the Needle Sub? The clue to that mystery is the mystery of the desert itself and the railroad that runs through it.
It is easier to accept the message of the stars than the message of the salt desert. The stars speak of man's insignificance in the long eternity of time. The desert speaks of his insignificance right now. Edwin Way Teal, Autumn Across America, 1956.
With your smile, the Thank you for watching this Real Rails edition of the Dream Plan Build video series. Look forward to future Real Rails installments as together we rediscover the past, present, and future of the world of trains around us.